Please consider supporting Black Women United YEG for the protection and advancement of Black women and girls in Alberta. You can learn more about them at bwunited.ca. They are always looking for donations and volunteers. So please, again, support Black Women United YEG for the protection and advancement of Black women and girls in Alberta. Again, that website is bwunited.ca.
Hey, this is Adam from Toronto, and I support Creative Control because Vish is full stop one of the best arts interviewers in Canada, or anywhere in the world, really. He approaches every episode like he's known the artist for years, creating a conversational atmosphere that gets straight to the heart of the work. No one else in podcasting gets it quite right like he does, with a mixture of meticulous research, wise artistic insights, and well-humored personal connections. I proudly support Vish and Creative Control on Patreon. You should too.
To make your flexible monthly donation to Creative Control, please visit patreon.com/Creative Control today.
Luka Kuplowsky is a gifted songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, filmmaker, and singer based in his hometown of Toronto, Ontario. He has been releasing fascinating and hard-to-categorize records over the past 10 years, often steeped in classic folk and pop songcraft, but also shaped by improvised music. His latest one is credited to Luka Kuplowsky and the Ryōkan Band, and is a compelling double album inspired by Zen Buddhism and Tang Dynasty poetry, and features some of Toronto's most gifted musicians immersed in improvisation and playing live together in a room. It's called How Can I Possibly Sleep When There Is Music? It's out on May 31st, 2024 via Nextdoor Records, and it prompted Luka and I to have a talk about his renewed interest in film studies in Toronto, how encountering Beverly Glenn-Copeland can change people's lives, his own exploration of Buddhism, meditation, Tang Dynasty poetry, and speak singing, why producer Sandro Perri suggested he perform one song like a tentative fifth grader giving a presentation in school, the magical gathering place and venue that is the Tranzac in Toronto, wanting to be just like Jackie Chan, theatrical staging, his next album, tour dates, other future plans, and much more. A part of the Entertainment One Network with the support of listeners just like you who follow and subscribe to this listener-supported and donor-driven podcast. Spread the word about it. Leave nice reviews and ratings on your podcast platform, and make flexible monthly donations at patreon.com/Creative Control, which is the primary source of income for me personally, and most reliable way for podcasters all over the place to make a living. And it's also where a $6 subscription a month means you can access every single episode of this show in its entirety, which is not the case without that subscription. Of course, any amount is appreciated, but you can learn more about the different levels and benefits at patreon.com/Creative Control. Thank you. Plus, in-kind support from independent businesses like Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, Ontario, and Granddad's Donuts in Hamilton, Ontario. This is episode 873 of Creative Control, featuring the lovely and talented Luka Kuplowsky, with your host, me, Vish Khanna.
Like a rebel exile, you just glean the suffering from the 21st century.
Hi, Luka. How's it going?
It's going well. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm well. Thanks for asking. Where in the world are you?
I'm in Toronto, in my home office.
Ah, nice. How are things in Toronto these days for you, in general?
Things are all right. Right now I'm back in school after like 10 years. So I'm doing a PhD at York. So just trying to kind of balance music and school at the moment.
What prompted the return to school after 10 years?
Well, I had always kind of had one foot in the door. I was doing teaching assistant work, and I just wanted to be able to have like autonomy in making courses. And then once I dipped my toe back in, I realized how much I kind of enjoyed doing research again. So it's quite fun right now. And it's a film studies program. So I get to, even though I'm doing a studies degree, I'm taking a lot of creative courses and trying to get back into what was really my first passion, which was film, like back in high school.
Yeah. You just sent me a new video, and I was quite struck by what it looked like. When you say film studies, are you a practical filmmaker, or are you more of a scholar of the form?
For this degree, I'm more of a scholar of the form, but I'm trying to develop a practice and really I'm trying to pick one up from what I started when I was a kid.
That's how you got into it, is trying to make your own films.
Yeah, I was making films as a kid and then wanted to go into university to like study them. And then music kind of took up, a lot of my time creatively for a while.
Well, I want to get to that trajectory in a more fulsome way, I suppose, as we go, because there may be people listening who aren't familiar with it. I myself am not 100% on it. But before we go too much further, congratulations on your new album. How Can I Possibly Sleep When There Is Music?
Yes.
It's an evocative title. And I wonder, maybe we should begin there. I have a sense of the concept of this record, but can you sort of explain this particular double record? I misspoke already. It's a double record. Can you give us a sense of where the idea for it came from and maybe what that title even relates to?
Yeah. So I like to call this record, rather than like a concept album, it's a process album, in that it kind of started with a process and then intuitively followed that without necessarily cohering into something that is, that you can kind of put in a box. So I think the root of it began when I met Beverly Glenn-Copeland in 2018. And he had come out to a show in Sackville, New Brunswick, and was really struck by the show. And we kind of made plans the next day, Bianca and I, who was playing in the band at the time, Bianca Palmer, to then go over and hang out with Glenn in his studio. And Glenn talked a lot about Buddhism at that time. He's a Buddhist practitioner, and the way that he talked about it also kind of expressed the way that it interlocked with his music and just philosophy of life and way of being. And so when I came back from tour, I was really drawn to Buddhist texts, both like kind of practicing, but also poetry. And so I started reading Ryōkan, and the way that I usually read poetry is with the guitar in my hand. So I'll just like be strumming and listening. And then the poems of Ryōkan, just while I was reading them, I just naturally started singing them. And so then I began writing songs in that mode, and occasionally playing them with friends at kind of different shows around town. And that's kind of originally why it was Luka Kuplowsky and the Ryōkan band, or sometimes we just go by the Ryōkan band. But the more I did that, the more other poets kind of opened up to song, and I thought, well, I'll incorporate these too. And there was no kind of reason that, these poets come together, but they were just kind of what I was reading and responding to at the time. And they kind of cohered into this interconnection of all these different poets.
Do you have much of a footing in poetry before all of this?
Yeah, I do. I have a love for poetry, but kind of was out of practice for many years. And this process actually got me back into writing poems. And then my current kind of songwriting practice is really adapting my own poetry, which I kind of think is separate things, but I then kind of find the bridge between them.
In the material on this album, are you adopting the voice of poets as they relate to other people who express things in the world in a way? Are you speaking on behalf of poets?
There's somewhat of like the broad poet, artist, songwriter that I feel like is being expressed through it. But I feel like the songs themselves, I like to think of them as either like interpretations or responses, because once you start this process of translation and you put them into song, it's really how that poem is resonating against me rather than trying to express, a poet's intention or something, which is always rooted in, so much complexity.
Do you think poets, in an overarching or generalized sense, do you think poets are regarded with enough respect by musicians, rock and roll musicians, filmmakers? Are poets the weirdos? Who are the poets in your estimation, Luka?
I don't know. I think there's within those camps that you were just describing, like there's always the alliances between the poets and the filmmakers, the poets and the musicians.
Yeah.
But they do work for that kind of niche audience and those margins. And it's an art form that, like, I think when done best, like, doesn't necessarily translate immediately to a large dominant audience.
I was just talking to someone about it, and if memory serves, it might have been Mike Watt who was on the show talking about, I asked him a question about, sorry, for context, he was on the show with David Pajo, and they had done a split 7-inch single in which each of them did the other's song, one of the other songs. And I asked Mike something about whether he spent much time reading David's lyrics as opposed to just listening to the original version of the song. And then he went on about the distinction between lyrics and poetry. And
yeah.
I mean, the obvious ones are you sing usually one of them. And I was talking to someone else about this on the show too, about how one underappreciated aspect of poetry is that it is performed. It is recited. And so I think they're really closely aligned. But again, Watt was kind of suggesting for him, they're rather different at the same time. And I appreciate what he's saying. For you, having said what you just said, what do you see as the linkage between poetry and lyricism? Is it possible for you to speak on that, given this project and how you're intermingling the two?
Yeah. Like one central like difference would be that it's also the visual. Poetry is also the visual. It's how the words look on the page. And that's even more so, you know, if we think about like the Tang Dynasty poets or the Zen poets on the record whose poems were written in calligraphy. And so Ryōkan was, in his time, was like so favored for the way that he drew his poetry and his kanji letters. So there's that visual element. There's also the way that once you adapt into song, the music itself is also interpreting and adding all these different layers of meaning that may not be there when reading something in your head or reading it out loud. And so I would hate to say it's like poetry is a pure form of language, but once you start intermixing it with music, there's all these other layers and complexities of meaning that start coming around it that just make it a bit harder to disentangle. But yeah, I think, you know, poetry has that visual element and just is maybe less muddy than when it gets folded into music. And I think one of the distinctions of what I wanted to do different from other approaches to poetry and music that I've seen in the past is often the music when someone's reading poetry is very static, and it's like an atmosphere that then the poem sits upon, where in this album I wanted the words and how they're delivered to kind of be in conversation with the music, and so that they're kind of equal footing rather than just the music being this platform for the words to be on.
I appreciate that you invoked the term conversation, because I was pondering your delivery and the way you're phrasing things here. And I, again, going back to what we were just talking about, what you were just saying, do you view yourself as a singer per se, or more as a poet? Because, and forgive me if this comes across the wrong way, I find that you are sitting in a realm of speak singing a little bit, on occasion at least. I know you're singing.
Yeah.
I know you're bending your voice to find notes and things, but there is a sort of spoken, I don't want to say spoken word because that has a whole other connotation, but there is a speaking quality to your approach to singing. Sorry, does that make sense? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah. Like, to me, it's still singing because of the kind of expressive way that it feels in my body when I do it. And I guess it would be similar to, you know, someone like Lou Reed speaks singing so often, but there's still something that feels different than thinking of it as just like spoken word poetry.
Right.
There's these little inflections or the turns of the phrase that kind of bring it into that realm of song.
Is Lou a big influence for you?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Especially late Lou, like where he really, his language just like frees up totally. And I think what I love about it is like you hear combinations of words in Lou Reed music that you don't hear anywhere else. And I think that's what that interconnection of poetry and song does, is it loosens up the kind of conventions of how people usually approach songs.
Yeah, I think Jonathan Richman shares that characteristic among other people. One of your colleagues here, Alex Lukashevsky, maybe, has those qualities as well. Okay. It's apparent listening to your record that you're someone who's fascinated by the way things are said as much as what is being said and how they're being said. So I can appreciate that. I want to go back to Glenn for a moment. Yeah. You suggested Glenn came to see one of your shows, and then via other interactions, you began exploring Buddhist practices. I want to just delve into that for a moment. First of all, did you have a spiritual grounding of any sort growing up or prior to this exploration of Buddhism?
Like, I grew up like Catholic Church, but it's not really a significant part of my life anymore. But have always kind of had an interest in the spiritual, and so there's a grounding there, but not specifically in Buddhism. So
what was it about what Glenn opened the door for you about? What was it about it that you, if you can, ponder it now, what was it about it that spoke to you, and is it still resonating with you? Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it hasn't cohered into like, I guess, like a formal practice for myself, but meeting Glenn was this kind of encounter with someone who I'd already kind of had a deep respect for, and then as I kind of learned about them more, just wanted to share in that insight. And so the way that he talked so passionately about Buddhism kind of moved me towards it. And then, Buddhist texts also have this, like the Lotus Sutra or the Heart Sutra, are these like deeply poetic philosophical texts. So even just the way that the language of those texts in translation are written kind of completely engrossed me. And I love just like reading different translations of the Lotus Sutra and the Heart Sutra and Diamond Sutra. And then I also just love how the practice of Buddhism, there's so many different denominations of it, but have a practice in meditation. And so, one of the songs on the record is Ryōkan's Instructions for Formal Meditation. And what I like about that song is every time I sing it, it reminds me like, yes, I need to do this because it it benefits me. It's almost instructional. It is. Yeah. It is. Yeah. And I'm not too rigid with following it, but I try to have like, at least a 5 to 10 minute meditation every day. Okay. Has it opened you up to Hinduism or other spiritual lines of thinking? I guess like maybe more just historically at the moment, but not. Okay. Yeah. And I think what can happen when, again, I'm not super familiar with such spiritual practices. I mean, I've read about them in terms of, my own personal experience. I grew up in a household that was Hindu, but I also resisted all of it to some extent. But also with faith-based things, I think they're meant to ground you so you don't flutter off into space or get confused or spend too much time maybe dwelling on terrible thoughts and feelings. Maybe, is that a way of putting it? Maybe I'm misspeaking, but that was my feeling about it. Do you know what I mean? Well, yeah. Well, with Buddhism, like the kind of central tenet is to kind of recognize that so many of our emotions that are these kind of extremes, are clinging to them is like what leads to our own suffering. And so meditation is, often this way that we can recognize those as passing, ephemeral. And so there's like this very practical function to like giving a stabilizing force in your life by not clinging to these kind of negative feelings. I wonder if Glenn's role in it plays a part as well. Because Glenn being the one to impart it to you, For those who don't know, Glenn is a really special person. And in my interactions with Glenn, I realize now that Glenn sees something in me that made him want to talk to me and also spend time with me. And he made me feel special in a way that I didn't really, it's just not something I dwell on. And I don't want to sound like an egomaniac, but for some reason, him devoting that attention to me made me not just feel special, but maybe believe that I was special enough that he thought there's something here in an interview context, or just like there's something something that he wants to spend time, something that appeals to him and thinks is worth honing or whatever, enhancing or whatever. I don't know how to put it, but do you think his role in introducing you to Buddhism plays a role in you wanting to engage with it because he made you feel like special? Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm saying the right thing.
It makes total sense. Like,
yeah.
I have this theory because I know so many people who have these encounters with Glenn, and like each one is such a gift, and it always seems like a calling. Like, like this encounter with Glenn is a calling towards something.
Yeah.
So this one was, it was very impactful, not just for this record, but when he came out to that show, he wrote a Facebook review. And it was like maybe the most meaningful review I've had in my life, of just
wow.
These are his thoughts on the show. And so like, it's a very pivotal moment, I think, in terms of me just feeling confident about my practice, but then also directing that practice and shaping it in a certain path.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I believe that you, like a lot of us who love Glenn, were particularly inspired and influenced by Keyboard Fantasies, Glenn's record. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think, so beyond interacting with him personally and having that relationship, do you feel like his music has inspired anything on this record? It's a hard to pin down record, like Glenn's records are. Do you think he was an influence on you musically?
I'd say he was in the orbit in that time, but more so on a record like, I think one of my only records it's just on Bandcamp, but Capturing the Evening Song, which is just for synth and voice. That one was like a directly, very much in the Keyboard Fantasies mode.
Okay.
But I think that it got into the DNA. So I feel like at that point, there's Glenn in the approach.
Okay. On the new record, this one that we're here to talk about, I pick up on playfulness and comedy here and there. I pick up on oddness in an endearing way, just weirdness. And I guess maybe the correct catch-all might be a certain kind of understated theatricality. And it's fascinating to me to hear about your film studies background now, because it's going to make me read too heavily into that aspect of your work, perhaps. But the notion of image conjuring, and I wonder if you can characterize the sound of this new album from your perspective, for those who haven't heard it. I mean, ideally they've heard bits of it by now, but on the show even. But can you characterize the sound of it from your own perspective?
It's difficult.
It is, right?
The original name of the band was actually the Ryōkan Blues Band, because there is like a strain of the blues. It's more heavily on like, let's say 3 or 4 tracks on the record, which were some of the first tracks we made, which is why we had that name. But then it kind of became bigger than just a blues sound and opened up. But I feel like my only way to describe it is like a Toronto sound, or like the sound of these players. Because if you think about the players in isolation, like the way that Lukashevsky plays the guitar, or Anne Fung's flute, Felicity's voice, they all have these moments to kind of exercise their musical voices. And then this is that convergence. And I think it's odd because an album sometimes are musicians like meeting a songwriter to try and kind of like blend into something. Well, I wanted them all, I think we create a blend, but I wanted them all to have some autonomy in expressing themselves. It's
so interesting to hear you evoke the notion of a Toronto sound, because
the Tranzac sound.
That's a good point. So let's dial into that, because there was a tweet not too long ago, as we're speaking, about people making fun of someone for suggesting there was a Toronto sound. People are like, what the hell is a Toronto sound? What does that even mean? You just said the Tranzac sound.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
You mentioned some great players there. How do you and I'm familiar with it.
Yeah.
Having spent a lot of time at the Tranzac for many years. I miss it, actually. But again, sorry, speak to the listeners as though they don't know what that means. What do you characterize as a Tranzac sound, per se?
So I would start off almost with like the space itself, because the space is, I think, what has afforded the sound over at least the last 25 years or so. Yeah. And so the Tranzac is in the NX neighborhood in Toronto, has these 3 rooms inside, kind of a small living room, the Southern Cross, which is kind of like a bar venue, and then the main hall. and it has cross-programming every night. So you have like maybe 6 different programs of music or theater or comedy occurring. And in the Southern Cross, where there's residencies, you'll have, a big contingent of improvised music, bluegrass, singer-songwriter, and so forth. So I think one part of that sound is the Tranzac sound is the meeting of improvisers and songwriters over the course of many years, and that shaping into something that we can kind of call a sound because of the group of players who are playing in different arrangements. But it's singer-songwriter music that bends towards improvisation.
Yeah.
And so things that kind of unsettle the normal conventions of a song.
Yeah, and we're drawing back to people like Eric Chenaux or early Jennifer Castle or Ryan Driver and the Reveries and Sandro Perri, who produced your album. Mm-hmm. And then some of the players on this record that you've already invoked are kind of part of that same scene, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to jump around in time, because you said that your footing as a young person was more in film. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And where did that footing start for you?
So that's more just like my form of play as a kid. So my brothers and I all loved film. We had a camcorder. We'd make movies. I was very, very infatuated and obsessed with Jackie Chan. So I imagined myself as a martial artist.
Oh, wow.
And then maybe around 15, 16, switched to like songwriter mode and started playing in bands. And really just like nothing, just kind of going through the process of learning a craft, like imitation and things like that. And then it wasn't until maybe 2013, and my entrance to, I guess, the Tranzac sound, as we might call it, was through the Holyoke. And it was seeing like Lukashevsky, Felicity and Daniela when Too Late Blues came out, seeing them perform. My brother was living in Montreal and was listening to Constellation Records. So then he told me, oh, you got to listen to Chenaux, you got to listen to Sandro Perri. And then I didn't realize they were all connected in this same world.
In Toronto.
So then, saw Marcus Starling and Ryan Driver and Jennifer Castle, and just started to understand, oh, these are all part of a kind of larger community and a larger sound that's being produced. So just started going to those shows and then becoming friends with folks and developing my kind of own voice within that scene.
Let's just step back a moment in terms of the shift from film to music.
Yeah.
Do you know what prompted that? Sorry, for film you said Jackie Chan was an influence there, but what prompted you to begin not only listening to music, I gather, but playing it? Can we go back there? What was it?
Yeah. Well, I was like parallel to that film, like seeing myself as more of a filmmaker. I had piano lessons as a kid. I was playing trumpet in high school, and I went to Etobicoke School of the Arts. So there were all these practice rooms there with pianos.
Oh, okay.
And I think that was an era in which there was lots of people playing in bands. And so I was like, well, maybe I want to be in a band too. And then there was all this time to be alone with a piano in a practice room and just either improvising or learning songs or writing songs. And so I think just the atmosphere of that school, I know that school has a big film program now, but at that time they didn't. And
this is a high school?
This was, a high school, Etobicoke School of the Arts. And
was there a lot of like culture in your household?
Yeah, my dad has an extensive record collection and CD collection.
Okay.
And so different eras of my childhood would be like unlocking a new section. Like first I only listened to, the Beatles and the Kinks. And then I was like, oh, well, what about the Specials? Or what about the Clash? Or what about Jonathan Richman? What about Lou Reed? Like it was such a big collection that it would take, multiple years and shifts and opening up my mind to kind of take in the whole collection before moving on to my own musical taste.
Was it organized in that chronological sense that you just outlined, or was it alphabetical?
It was alphabetical, but I would always be like, skip.
My son started collecting vinyl records, he's like, where do I put them? I'm like, well, you can just put them in with my collection because this is going to be yours someday. Yeah. And he's like, well, how does that work? I'm like, well, your Kendrick Lamar goes under L. He's like, not K? I'm like, oh God. No, under L. And then, but I was thinking about how anyone, a child in particular, would process all of this material. Because it's all alphabetical, chronological by artist, I guess. It's quite organized, but I would think he would be the same. Like, where do I even begin to get a sense of what my dad likes? Anyway, sorry, that's a tangent. I just wondered about your own. It sounds like you had a big collection to choose from, which is amazing, but also, like, where do you start? Yeah. So you figured it out.
Well, I think I was just really opinionated at different ages of like what I liked. And it just, like, maybe to my discredit, but it at least made it more manageable. Because I was like, I only like this style of music. So I'd work through the collection in one way.
Was that dictated by any social gatherings of people saying, you got to check out The Clash, and you thinking, oh, well, my dad has all those records. Sure, I'll do that. Or where did that sort of impulse to go to Jonathan Richman and Lou Reed and all those folks? Do you know where that came from?
Like, Jonathan Richman was just, I think, that one was pure happenstance in terms of maybe around 19 or 20, like wanting to methodically go through the record collection. And so I put on Richman and actually kind of hated it. It was, which record was it? It was that 78 one with like his smiling face and like clouds in the background. But I remember kind of just turning it off immediately. Because when I was working through the collection, I'd put a song on for like 30 seconds and be like, nah, this isn't for me. Yeah. But then I remember 2 days later, I was like, well, I should give that one another shot. There was something about it. And
he's like that. He you might be like, what is this? And then you find yourself thinking about or humming the song that you thought you didn't like. And then you're like, wait a minute, this guy's a genius. Absolute genius. I think Richmond has that. I don't mean, I love him, by the way, just to clarify. I don't mean to disparage. So, hey, thanks for listening to Creative Control, as always. As you may have heard me mention, I recently lost my day job, and I've had a few conversations with people since who've said, you had a day job? I thought your podcast was your day job. When I explained why it hasn't been my day job to a friend, he suggested I should share some of this information with people like you listening right now. So, in short, unless they have some giant exclusive $1 million contract, podcasters are not paid to make stuff by companies like Apple and Spotify. Podcasters do not make any money from streaming royalties. Ad revenue is dependent on a certain threshold of downloads each month, and even if your show is accessed 30,000 times a month, the income you get is actually really minimal. So podcasters like me usually make time in our lives to support our communities and our interests to make these shows, and our most reliable source of income for this work is, in fact, crowdfunding. In my case, it's my Patreon. So if you'd like to receive ad-free episodes earlier than everyone else, regular newsletters and blog posts, bonus audio content, and support my work, quite literally, please visit patreon.com/creativecontrol today. Okay, that's fascinating stuff. So you were playing piano. Mm-hmm. Did you abandon the film? Did you leave Jackie Chan behind?
Well, he started to disappoint me. He made The Tuxedo in 2003 and made a lot of poor decisions in filmmaking. So I think have you seen The Spy Next Door? I have seen The Spy Next Door. That's
pretty good. One of my kids picked it. I understand what you're saying. You're a purist.
I'm a purist. I love a certain Snake and Eagle shadow until maybe Who Am I? Okay. That's my era.
But he kind of, everything changed with, was it Rush Hour or Rumble in the Bronx? Which one came first? One of them.
Rumble in the Bronx came first. And that was a big breakthrough. Rush Hour then was like, he was sailing at that point.
Yeah. Well, I will recommend The Spy Next Door. One of my kids picked it for one of our family movie nights, and they were like, yeah, it's pretty good. It's not terrible.
You know what? I think at the time there was such expectation. Now I think I can maybe get into The Spy Next Door.
I have a thing when my kids pick a movie, my impulse is to try to like it no matter what. That's great. So I might be biased. But I'm not saying it's classic filmmaking, but it was pretty good. Mm-hmm. Anyway, sorry. So you decide to leave some of your interest in film behind. You're playing piano. What other instruments are you playing or able to play at this point? Let's start there. Yeah. What can you play now?
I guess mainly just keyboards, guitar, and trumpet. And trumpet I kind of left behind after high school, though recently played for for a show recent that's a longer story, but have reacquainted with the trumpet recently and might get back into that.
Okay. Is it important to be a multi-instrumentalist in Tranzac Toronto so you can play with anyone?
I think that it makes it more fun. And maybe that's why I'm considering honing my trumpet chops.
Yeah. I think it's fun to go, and I don't know what's going on there. Again, forgive me, everyone around the world, but there's some magical stuff that used to happen in the Tranzac, and I'm not sure if it still happens because I don't live anywhere close to the area. But are there like Wood Choppers Association gatherings or anything like that anymore?
I don't know if that is still going on, but there's still like, they've made a big push recently to introduce a lot of different residencies in the city, just because, like, I think some of the ones that have been there for, like, Ryan Driver's still doing, the sextet every last Friday. Tom Gill and I run the Holyoke Family Singers every first Wednesday. But some of the new ones are like Aline Hamzy has this series called Ghost Girl. Masahiro Takahashi is doing a new series for the next 6 months. Yeah, like the Brody West Quintet, Josh Cole, like... Yeah,
I invoked the Woodchoppers one because it was a bit more of a free-for-all. And anyone could kind of hop on when those things happened, in my experience anyway. I never lived in Toronto, by the way, but I was often around when weird things were happening at the Tranzac. And you did say something earlier about the sound and how there's one room can have comedy and something going on. The other room can have free folk or improvisation. And then another room can have like a big rock show.
Yeah.
And what I often marvel at, and I wonder if you think this is something that impacts anyone in the room, they often bled into each other. It was you would hear one thing while you were experiencing another, and beyond the sort of ADHD it gave you, I think it could be your body and your mind might be like, oh yeah, that's a sound. That's a sound right there of just everything happening at once, and maybe that seeps into bands. Because earlier I asked you about comedy and humor and whatnot on this record, and I don't know how you took it. So let's start there. Do you feel like there's humor on your new record?
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure I didn't say.
Yeah.
So I've been asking
the poets are funny. The poets are funny, so I got to be funny too.
I've been making these assertions lately. I think maybe I've always done it, but just like sometimes very serious, artful things, the humor goes by people because they think it's meant to be very earnest. And I'm like, no, clearly that's a joke or that's meant to be funny, but they're afraid to laugh because they want to be high-minded.
Yeah.
Comedy and humor is a big part of poetry and in your practice as well.
And when we were talking about Lou Reed, like he's a comedian, big time.
Yes.
So,
okay.
But it's always, people don't know quite to laugh because he's sometimes most intense when he's being really funny.
Well, I don't normally ask people about titles. I know they can serve as a conceptual umbrella for a project.
Yeah.
How can I possibly sleep when there is music? Amuses me, but where does that... Did we ever establish where that actually came from, that title?
So I can't remember if it's the exact words, but it comes from a Ryōkan poem.
Okay.
And so it was one of the first... It's one of the first ones, but it's more of that song itself is more of a response. And of all the jokes, I feel like that one maybe isn't... It's just like, it's the truth,
Yeah, that's what I mean.
The truth
funny
is funny
because it's true.
Yeah.
It's funny because it's true is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
That stuck out for you. What does that mean to you?
It can mean a couple things, but I think one part of it is just the way that because the next line is, how can I possibly sleep when there is music? When there's music and dancing, I love dancing too. So the way that it kind of just propels the body, makes you move. I also think often of just how much, none of us can ever listen to all the amazing music in the world.
Yeah.
And so that is this sublime, beautiful gift that we have that we shouldn't be overwhelmed by, but just be grateful that every day we can potentially listen to something amazing or life-changing that we didn't know before. And that's constantly happening all the time. And then I also just have this image, I feel of, this is more of a more personal one of being a kid and hearing music downstairs and wanting to listen to that as I was going to sleep. And that's something I just came to mind right now that the album title kind of conjured. But those are some ways I feel that you could understand the title.
Vaguely harkens back to what I was saying about the kind of incidental music experience you might have at a place like the Tranzac.
Yeah.
Or rather, happenstance music, I should say. I didn't even mean to hear that. I just was going to the bathroom, and now I'm intrigued. I was in another room, and now I'm intrigued by this thing. It's almost like music is this beautiful distraction, and you don't want to miss anything. You get FOMO when you sleep. You'd rather be listening to the music emanating from your, I assume, your family home?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think even when you were saying distraction, in that sense, distraction is this virtue of allowing you to not be kind of fixed or contained in the way that you're listening.
Yeah.
And also when you were talking about comedy, it made me think of the way that I've had many experiences in the Southern Cross when it's, a low-key night, very few people there, the main hall's packed, and you'll have these really funny convergences where the Southern Cross act will finish a song at the exact same time as the other room. And, our room will have 3 people clapping and the other room has a huge crowd clapping, but we're all clapping for music.
Yeah. I do think the Tranzac is not only magical, potentially haunted. That seems like more than a coincidence. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things I find appealing about your new album is that it's brimming with lots of ideas. As you can hear me kind of stumbling about, I pick up on different emotional tones and sounds. And like you said earlier, it's complicated to easily describe them. I want to go to Sandro Perri because you tagged him to produce this. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about that collaboration, what he brought to this, how he helped shape this record?
Yeah. So I would say before we met with Sandro, and really Sandro came on board the record, we had agreed to work together maybe about a year before we tracked it, but the band itself was developing its own chemistry and sound. So he wasn't a producer in so much, creating a sound for the record. But I think the best way that I describe it is that he was really responsible for figuring out the weight and density of how we improvised with each other. And so in the session, it was very much, some songs are 1 take, some songs are 3 or 10 takes. And the 10 takes one, it was because we would play the song and there was just people were going too crazy at one moment, or there was a lack of focus. And so his role was kind of, clarifying how much we needed to do in terms of I think density and weight is the best way to put it, because we knew that we were recording it live and we're going to take out, I think maybe there's one guitar line that was isolated we were able to take out in post-production, but we wanted to create a live record. So I needed someone who was very perceptive and knew what a palette of a song needed. And then for my singing, he was very helpful because of all those distinctions between singing, singing, and speaking. And he kind of pushed me in certain songs to be no, you should really just speak this one.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite moments was the song Dreaming of Li-Pai. He was imagine you're a grade 5 student, reading this poem for a class. And you have a sense of what it means, but you're also just kind of going through the motions, but then maybe you got caught off guard by the emotions of reading it.
Huh.
And those moments clarified, they would then, if I started doing that, the band would react, because then they would have to play differently if I'm no longer singing or singing and rather just speaking.
That's fascinating. So what does it mean to you as a film studies major to have your producer direct your line reading?
I think it just makes perfect sense.
It's an interesting confluence of, so you had to kind of, he's in a sense asking you to perform, to act.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have an acting background by chance?
No. Well, other than my own childhood films.
No, yeah, sorry. I wasn't sure if you pursued it, but
no.
That could be weird for someone to ask you to dial into the emotion of a grade 5 student, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think, I feel that's the way that you can, being conscious about the character, the way that you say lines is how you're able to say lines that you can't normally do in a song. Because if someone just sings in a very straight, conventional way, those kind of clumsy words or poetic words, they don't fit. But if you figure out the way to say them, then you can really say anything in a song. And so I think I've always been very conscious of, like, if I'm using different language, I'm like, well, I need to say it in a way that makes sense rather than just trying to approach it like any other lyric.
I don't know if you've performed these songs live before or yet. Do you have any wild notions about how you might want to stage a performance of the songs from this record? Meaning, will you simply perform them as you would at a band? Could you see yourself including deliberate theatrical elements as well in some way?
Well, hopefully it comes together. But when we were speaking, or maybe you mentioned in passing the What Luck video, I'm hoping that Noriko, at least for the Toronto release show, will dance for at least 2 or 3 of the songs.
Okay.
And I also, because I've directed all the videos for the record, even though they are a bit different each one, like there's a stylistic cohesion to them that I might want to pair those visually as well with, or use that raw footage to create like a 30-minute or 40-minute loop that then is projected as well.
So I'm kind of onto something.
You're onto something. Yeah.
I'm onto something. I was like, he's going to say no. He's going to say no. Of course not. I got enough to worry about with just the music. You are thinking about the visual and theatrical elements of performing these songs. Okay.
It'll differ from place to place, but when it's possible, yeah.
When did you realize you had a double record on your hands? And did anyone involved in the business aspect of it, producer or otherwise, say, double record, maybe we should scale this back? Did anyone say that?
I guess the label was at first a little hesitant, but I couldn't figure out, once I had kind of arranged everything together, I was just so set with the way that it flowed and made a compromise on no gatefold. So
it's a one sleeve with the 2 records inside?
One sleeve with 2 records inside. And then the gatefold image that I had imagined is now a poster that comes with it, and then has information on the poets and the translators and the record itself on the back. Your
brother Adam made the poster, is that right?
Yeah, my brother illustrated the poster, Adam, and then my mom, the artwork on the front is my mom's.
Is there some significance to this being such a family affair for you?
I think increasingly and also throughout my work, I often collaborate with family. So my first Luka Kuplowsky record, I guess, was Calling All Cats Black, and that's an illustration by Adam. Stardust is also an illustration by Adam. My partner took the photographs for Summon Up a Monkey King. Capturing the Evening Song is my mom's illustration. I love collaborating with family, and I love how specifically this record turned out in terms of how the artwork is all in kind of different styles, but they match up in different ways.
I mean, it's sweet that your family's involved, and I appreciate that you like it. I guess I just wonder if there's any grander meaning than that. It's just you clearly tighten it with your family, I guess, is where I'm coming from.
Yeah. I don't know. You could read into the fact that Adam did the illustration, and the illustration is really a roadmap to many of the artists on the record. And, Adam introduced me to Sandro, at least his music.
Yeah, right.
So there's significance there, but it's not planned.
Okay.
But just maybe speaks to our bond.
Yeah. No, it's lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Whole record's lovely, and I want to congratulate you on it. It's ambitious, and I can't stop thinking about it, but I also don't know what to think. Does that make any sense? Like, it's my own lack of intelligence, and
you're in your process.
I'm processing as well. Yeah, exactly. So there is a lot to process. Have you started working on new material since wrapping this up? Did you learn something from the experience with Sandro and these folks that's going to lead you into your next project? Are we too early for that, or has it started?
There is another record in the can.
It's done.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like maybe a year ago.
Oh, okay.
This record was held up for a bit, just due to label stuff. But the next one is really taking up the the poet on this record, Bogdan Ihor Antonich, who I feature 2 of his poems. He's a Ukrainian imagist poet from the early 20th century who died quite young at like 27. And this will be another poetry record specifically of his poems and his kind of, he does all these kind of, both kind of like syncretic nature poems where he's becoming plants and becoming grass, and then also these apocalypse poems. And so the record is kind of a collage of all these different poems. And I worked on that with Joseph Shabason last summer.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah. And so do you now have a sense of when that might be coming out?
Not quite. There's while the record's in the bag, there's a couple little loose ends to it that I need to still figure out. Okay. It'd be nice to put it out next year, but it might be a little bit longer than that.
Okay. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that as well. That's great. Mm-hmm. Congratulations on all these things. Any other future plans you want to tell us about? As we're speaking, the record's going to be out this week. And you mentioned a show. Is there more than one show? What's coming up for you?
Yes, there are. In June, there's 3 shows. I believe the 14th is in Hamilton at Into the Abyss with Alma. And then the 15th, I can't remember the exact lineup, but it's, I believe, with Sandro and Peter Zumo and You Can at Wolf Island Hotel. And then the 18th is the Toronto release at the Tranzac with Tom Gillen, Fan Wu, and Christopher Wills playing The Heart of Going La. And Fan is actually one of the translators on the record of one of the Du Fu and Levi poems.
Oh, cool.
And then at some point in August, I'm hoping to go out east towards Halifax and kind of play all the cities in between Toronto and Halifax.
Sappy Fest, perhaps, or no?
Not Sappy, later in August. Yeah,
oh, okay.
Post-Sappy.
Okay, okay, cool. So if people want to learn more about all of these things and you, where would you like to direct them on the computers and the telephones?
Yeah, I guess for music, Bandcamp would be great. So that's lucalives.bandcamp.com. And then Instagram, I think, fairly active on there. And then recently I started a Substack that I think is under the name Luka Kuplowsky. And I've been writing just kind of long form reflections on the record or other things. And hope that it just opens up into, after the album cycle, just opens up into various interests.
Very nice. Okay, well, I'll link to some of those things as well. And hopefully people connect with you because you're doing cool work, Luka, if I might say.
Thank you. Thank you,
Vish. Yeah. If we can go out on a song from this double album, I wonder if you can pick one for us and let me know why it came to mind. Is that something you can do?
Yes. Okay. Dreaming of Levi. This is just one of my collaborators, really since the beginning, is Evan Cartwright, and him and I both think this is the best song on the record. It's just the one that like makes us cry, moves us. It's also that song that Sandro directed me to read as a 5th grader.
Okay.
So there'll be some context for that. Whether that translates, I think is irregardless.
Well, now we're going to
do something.
We're all going to listen for it now. You've colored it for us. By the way, is there a parentheses?
Yes. So the parentheses on the record are to, I guess, attribute the poet. So this is Dreaming of Levi by Du Fu. And this alludes to this kind of great... So Du Fu and Levi are these 2 infamous Tang Dynasty poets who had these 2 encounters in their life, but they've been kind of mythologized because they were very much fond of each other. And so this is Famu's reworking or translation of one of Du Fu's poems where he's dreaming of Levi.
Okay. All right. Well, let's hear it now. This is Dreaming of Levi, Du Fu, from the excellent new record, How Can I Possibly Sleep When There Is Music, by Luka Kuplowsky. Luka, thank you so much for making time for me and being on this show. It means a lot. And I hope we talk again. And I wish you the best luck in the future.
Thank you so much. I love this show and glad to be on it now. Thanks, Ish.
Saying goodbye to the dead. I can swallow my tears, but saying goodbye to the living is so painful. South on the Yangtze is some hazy fever. Word from you, dear exile, has not reached me here. Through my dreams, for this long now, I've been a believer. Now you're caught in divine law. Are you a bird? Do your wings still carry you? Winged weaver. Road without end. Too far into the distance. Is there your spirit left to comfort the griever? Your spirit came from a greener maple forest, and your spirit returned to a threshold much darker. Moonlight fills my room, and reveals the color of your face to I, lonely perceiver. Dragon. Go easy. Go easy. I'm begging you, dragon. Go easy. Go easy.
There you have it. Brand new music by Luka Kuplowsky and the Ryōkan band. Thanks so much to Luka for being on this show. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Luka. There's a chance some of you hadn't heard him speak before, but maybe you're also tuning in because you hear him talk all the time, and it was just like hanging out with him a little bit. And me, I don't know. Anyway, I want to thank Luka again for appearing on this, the 873rd episode of Creative Control, which is part of the Entertainment One podcast network and is available pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. If you can't locate an episode you're looking for, or if you want to learn more about me, and also if you'd like to sign up for my monthly newsletter, you can, all at vishkhanna.com. Also, click on the hyperlink text that says follow Vish online to follow me on various social media things, or to subscribe to the YouTube channel version of this show, or whatever you want to do. There's some links there. Most importantly, I hope you'll visit patreon.com/creative control to make a flexible monthly donation. As I said at the top of the show, all amounts are welcome, but I do want to highlight the fact that the $6 American a month tier, because there's different tiers and levels with different benefits, but that $6 a month tier gets you every single episode in its entirety, and that's not the case otherwise. Otherwise, it's every other episode in its entirety, and then you get little clips of the episodes that are in the $6 tier. There's other benefits too, and other tiers, and I'd urge you to check them out if you can. This is my primary way of making a living, and it's going pretty well, but I'm still a little nervous and skittish and all those sorts of things, but it's none of your concern. I just like doing this show, and I'm very flattered by all the people who appreciate it. So anyway, if you'd like to support the show and subscribe to it, patreon.com/creative control. Thank you very much. Also want to thank some fine independent businesses like Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, Ontario, and Granddad's Donuts in Hamilton, Ontario for their in-kind support for this show. Also want to thank Jim Guthrie, great musician, and he lends me some music he made for this show. You can learn more about that and all his vast catalog of song at jimguthrie.org. And finally, thank you so much for listening to this episode with Luka Kuplowsky. Check out his wonderful new album. It's a double album, in fact, so, you know, you got to dig in. It's really something else. And I appreciate Luka again for being on this show. Also want to thank you for subscribing to this podcast or following it. And if you can, leave a nice rating or review on your pod thing. That would be helpful. And telling your friends about the show, too. Spreading the word in a grassroots fashion is helpful. So thank you very much. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now.